Ray to the left. Oh, Joe. Oh, great. Okay. Thank you, Joanne. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is a special work session with the Town Council and the Federal Aviation Association group and AIR, and lots of great airport and airplane information. If I could right now just go around the table and ask you all to introduce yourself, please, and thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. I'd also like to include an introduction from the members of the AIR group who are in the audience. Joanne, you said you wanted them to introduce themselves. And so if we could just start, and remember we've got limited microphones. Hopefully this is going to be remedied soon in the future, but we will we'll start here with Vice Mayor Murphy.
You just said it. Vice Mayor Ray Murphy.
Councilmember Joanne Champ, and I'll just stop right now and just say our AIR group, there's members here and other citizens here. The AIR group is very active. They've done analysis of nearly 63,000 arrivals at RSW, and they work actively in the community with regard to that. I think that we probably don't need to name each one by name right now. I'll tell you that we have attorneys and physicians and pilots and engineers, and so they all look at this from a different interest, but they all live here on the island, are impacted, and appreciate being here and being part of it. And we may get a couple questions from them during questions and answers. So thank you.
Thank you, Joanne.
Hi, Jose Colon with the Federal Aviation Administration, New Community Engagement Officer.
Nice to see you.
Likewise.
Hi, I'm Jeff Mulder, Director for the Lee County Port Authority.
Nice to have you here, Jeff.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Tyler Brown, Noise and Airspace Project Coordinator with the Lee County Port Authority.
Nice to have you here.
Joe Molson, Air Traffic Manager, RSW.
Hi, Joe.
Rob Johnson, Air Traffic Control Operations Supervisor.
Bruce Butcher, Fort Myers Beach Council.
Chubby Moulton, Eastern Service Center Airspace and Procedures.
I'm Michael O'Hare. I'm the Regional Administrator for the FAA Southern Region.
And I'm Ray Sandelli, Commissioner, District 3.
Nice to have you all here this afternoon. So Joanne is the liaison to the AIR group, so I'm going to turn the meeting over to her and let her start it out. Thank you, Joanne.
Well, thank you. We last met in May and had a productive meeting, and Administrator O'Hara was kind enough to contact us and give us another date for follow-up. So you called the meeting in essence, so I'm going to turn it next to you, sir. Thank you.
Joanne, thank you for that. Mayor, Vice Mayor, we appreciate all of the council being available to us today, and for the benefit of anybody who wasn't at our meeting the end of May, the feedback from the FAA universally was appreciative and impressed by the amount of data, research, and thoughtfulness that went into that. And I think there perhaps are some folks that I'm looking at back from the table that were contributors to that perspective, and we appreciate that. It was a very helpful exchange that we had back in May, and talked a little bit about aircraft operations in and around Fort Myers Beach and specifically on the island here. Discussions specifically about routes and altitudes and the sensitivities there, as well as some specific concerns that were raised in that meeting. And we committed to looking into that further. We took a wealth of information back and processed some of the high points of that. Obviously, we were sharing our perspective initially at that meeting as well. We, to the best of my recollection, targeted, I believe, a fall meeting, which led to my outreach to Joanne and kind of searching for a date that would be consistent with that commitment. So in light of the productivity of the last discussion, we're not here with magical answers today, but we are here, I think, with maybe a bit of good news and then some additional discussions on some next steps. We have some information to share that was specifically a follow-up from the last meeting and some of the discussions that were there. And then we also have some notional or conceptual procedural designs that we want to continue the dialogue about. And from the FAA perspective, anytime you talk about new or conceptual procedures, there can be benefits, and those benefits can vary whether you're a resident in one location, or it could be a challenge if you're a resident in another location. It can have economic impacts if you're involved in the industry side of things, and changes can also trigger environmental impacts. So we'll talk some about the energy around some of those options and see kind of what the interest level is from this group and the airport and some of those options. But I think some of what Chubby Moten has for us, he'll do the more technical part of our briefing, but I think some of the information Chubby will share hopefully at least starts out on a positive note, as I said, based on some of the feedback. So we'll be here. We're open to the dialogue, and I'll turn it over to Chubby to walk through some of the material that we brought with us today.
Thanks again. Thank you very much, Mr. Hare. And thanks again for allowing us to come back today. Like I said, just to follow up from our discussion back in May. Based on some of the conversation and just based on the back end with the questions, we did go and looked at the procedure. We had some open discussion with the two involved facilities, taking into account the information that we received. And so just kind of the first part of this presentation is just more of a recap of that discussion. And then, like I said, we'll get to a little bit more of the next step information. Just the agenda, we've done, the first part is just the introduction, and we've already gone through that. And then we'll get into some of the previous effort to address the concerns and mitigation under evaluation. And then we'll speak briefly to some of the current procedures for runway 6, which is the concerned runway, change consideration, and the next steps. Previous effort, as we discussed, we developed and implemented the
It's a $50 fine. Do you know that?
we did, no problem.
It's okay.
Developed and implemented the Bay Visual to procedure to runway 6, and that was under discussion. Also, the ILS system initial approach fixed altitude raised to 3,000 feet, and that was an initiative to see if that would mitigate some of the concerns. Also, the runway 24 made the preferred runway during the midnight operation, and that was an effort to keep the traffic from over the inland, away from the beach area. Also, evaluated proposal to move the initial approach fix for the approaches closer to the airport, and attempted to expand the usability of the RNAP visual approach to runway 6 to all certified and properly equipped aircraft. Mitigation is under evaluation. So what we looked at after our previous meeting, is just to figure out, could we look at it from a long-term and a short-term mitigation? Because some things we feel we could do in the interim period now and then see if it would have an effect. And something would be more of a long-term because it would be a little bit more design, which would affect the procedures. As always, that's, it's time and effort, and there's many things you have to consider when you actually change a procedure for the long term. So what we asked the two involved facilities at Regional Southwest Air Traffic Control Tower and Miami Center to review their SOPs. And that was just an effort to look at ways they could improve the language, if there was something in their oversight just because of over a period of time, to see if we could make some proposed changes that would impact the operation.
Chubby, could I interject here for a second? I'm not terribly familiar with all the acronyms. What is SOP?
Standard operating procedure.
Okay, well, that's a good one.
Yeah.
All right.
And it's basically, it's a memorandum, it's a letter just set forth procedure in place for this particular operation.
Thank you for that.
No problem. So we asked the facilities to look at that. Also, we evaluated the informal runway use program, and that was for effectiveness. And what we found when we looked at that, from the standpoint of Miami Center, there seemed to be somewhat of a disconnect or at least there was not a broad understanding of the program. And I think that was just over a period of time, maybe because it's primarily on the mid-shift, changes of personnel, changes of management, changes of specialists. So they went back and looked at their program. And through that effort, what we were able to find out that they were not probably not to the best of their ability enforcing the process. So what they have done in that interim, they have actually gone through and developed several briefings for the controllers. They did what we call a mandatory briefing item, and basically what that is, as the controllers come on duty, they are assigned that information and they have to initial for it. So it kind of explains the program. In addition,
Thank you, Chubby. If I could, 'cause I think to some extent we're building on a previous conversation, but not everybody in the room was in that conversation. So I just want to expand some of the information that Joanne specifically shared at our May 30th meeting was that runway 24 is the preferred runway on the mids. I mean, she didn't share that, but in recognition of the fact that runway 24 coming in from the northeast is the preferred runway on the mids, the data that was shared with the FAA was that the runway is used 66% of the time at night. And there are reasons why. That it could be weather, it could be winds. There are a lot of factors that could lead to that. But the more interesting statistic was that my notes at least indicate 62% of the approaches use runway 6. I think I may have said that backwards. So 62% use runway 6 when Fort Myers Tower is open, but 74% are using runway 6 from the southwest when the traffic's handed off to Miami Center. So the conversation a little bit deeper in May was, why is that? And I just wanted to share that context. So going back to that, we've had some conversations with the facility about their understanding of that informal runway use plan.
yeah, thank you very much for that clarification. Yes, sir. And so what we did after looking at, they, as I stated before, they developed a briefing item, and that was passed to all the controllers. And also, they're going to put it in their yearly training. So hopefully, by putting in their requirements for the training on the controllers on a yearly basis, therefore, from here going forward, there'll be a better way of tracking that compliance with that particular procedure. Also, the next bill, it speaks to really what Mr. O'Hare was just talking about. When we met last time, there was some discussion about the procedures when the tower was in controller operation versus when it was on Miami Center. So we have a slide that will show the information that we looked at based on that discussion. And also, we went back and we visited the development of 2 procedures, the RNAV Global Positioning System, GPS, or the Required Navigation Performance, RNP procedure to runway 6. So we'll have a little bit more discussion on that also. So speaking to, that's the bullet where we looked at, based on the conversation back in May, when we were looking at the different operation, when the tower had the operation and versus when the center had the operation. So I'll actually use it from up here, so it'll probably be a little bit better to point to. So what we found that when the tower was in, and we're primarily talking about this here.
It's a microphone.
I'm losing because of the distance, I'm sorry.
Do we not have a? Amy, do we have a portable microphone? We don't have a portable microphone.
So, okay, all right, no problem. So so hopefully everybody can see, we're talking, if you're talking to the southwest portion, if you look at the traffic, when the tower has their operation, you'll see where they're coming to the southwest. You see most of them are staying pretty close to the inland, like going over the beach area, and also the ones that are coming in from the northwest, you see they're following pretty much that general area. You do see some disbursement where they're going a little bit farther over the water, coming in over the island. So we did notice that was the operation as we spoke to back in May. So that seems to be the trend. And you also know some of the more defined lines, you will see where more of a concentration, that's just aircraft that are on the procedure. And as you see more of the single lines, as controllers are vectoring, creating spaces, blending the north screen with the south feed, so you will expand the procedure and the downwind and the turn to final a little bit farther out, just to make sure we got the appropriate spacing. So Now then, we went in and we looked at, and let me go back to, so what we did, we just picked a month. We just used September, so that was no particular month involved. We just had some most recent data, so we did pick September. We do understand that September is probably not the busiest period of time.
Sure.
But for this discussion, we chose that just to demonstrate that the uses of the runway. And so you'll see on this particular side, when Miami Center has the operation, you'll see where it's more defined aircraft are more along that single line. You will see some areas where maybe a little bit harder on the presentation. You'll see some just to the south and a few to the north. But just be aware, this is for runway 6, not 24. And so that spoke to that discussion about when the center has the operation, more the aircraft are actually proceeding over the beach area. And as we spoke to earlier, a lot of that has to do when the center has the operation, because of the scale of the airspace and some of the procedures involved. Sometimes it's the controller will just clear the aircraft for the procedure, and if they're using visual, once the aircraft gets their airport in sight, they'll just be cleared for a visual. So you're going to find they're going to stay on the procedure a little bit longer than when the tower has the operation. And so this is just a combination of the two, and we just put the two together so you can see the difference. And so that did really speak to the fact that the operation on the midshift with Miami Center and the tower was a little bit different. So our hope is having that discussion with Miami Center, doing the training, doing the refresher, doing the mandatory briefing item, there will be a little bit more awareness of the informal runway use program. As always, remember, because of winds and certain factors, they may or may not always be able to implement the program. So the hope is that because of those discussion and awareness, there will be a change to their operation.
And we had a discussion last week in the office about reviewing data. September doesn't give us enough time, and you know, as Chubby said, it's just the most recent month.
Sure.
Last time we were here, we had different months of data that were closer to the peak. I don't remember exactly which month, but we certainly realize September is not the busiest time of the year or the most noise-sensitive time of the year based on some of the tourists that are here as well, but it was the most recent data. But we're committed to looking at the effectiveness of that training at Miami Center. But we feel like 4 months.
Yeah, we've kind of figured we'd give it a little time to take effect, and somewhere between the 4 and 6 months, we'll kind of go back and compare data based on when those discussions began and when they were completed, and see if there's a difference between the traffic at that point. And hopefully there will be a noticeable difference, and then we will be able to determine, you know, the compliance level.
And that doesn't mean that all the operations will be using 2.4, but my hope would be, I'll go back to the numbers that I quoted, at least so I'm consistent, whether they're right or not, but I think we said 62% of the approaches when the Fort Myers tower was open, and 74%, a higher percentage was using runway 6 when Miami Center had the control. In theory, we could see an increase of runway 2.4 in both of those times because of the increase in awareness. So that's our hope. That's the data we'll be looking at. We could tell you it will get better. Our hope is it will get better, but what I'm saying is we'll monitor it to make sure that it's getting better. And
Great.
we'll figure out how we address it if for some reason it's not, but we'll be following up.
Thank you. So what we also, this is more of a recap from the previous, these are the current procedures in place for runway 6. We got the ILS localizer, DME or distant measuring equipment approach procedure, GPS approach procedure, and the back bay visual approach procedure. So one thing we always have to be aware of anytime we're doing changes to the operation, there are going to be environmental concerns. There's orders, and we'll get a little bit more into those. NEPA is in effect. We're going to be looking at, because there's confined airspace, because anytime we make a change at one place, it's probably going to affect a change at somewhere else. So you have to be mindful of that. The proximity of the airport to the beach and the airport configuration, the single runway. Pilot concerns over procedure design, there are changes because that has to do with fleet mixture, training, a multitude of factors that we always had to be aware of that as we go into any changes. Air traffic control procedures, operation requirement, there's training, there's certification, there's the operation, so any changes do along those lines, we have to take those into effect. And also, we gotta be aware that there's two sets of controllers. There's the tower controllers and there's center controller, because the airspace reverts to Miami Center during the mid-operation. And there's a significant amount of VFR traffic, visual flight routes traffic, that not in communication or controlled by ATC. So they're aircraft that are flying around that are not under control of the tower or the center controller.
What kind of aircraft would that be? Is that commercial jets that wouldn't be communicating with the tower?
It should not be commercial jets.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
No. It's gonna be just more general aviation. Yes.
So to the extent the concerns are all about the jet traffic,
Yeah.
that last bullet is less of a concern.
Yes, sir.
Although the pilot in command for those aircraft certainly has some,
Well,
certainly has some authority as well.
Yeah. And the thing that we put in there, because oftentimes we think of, when we're talking about noise and we're thinking more about we're thinking about air carriers, but you also have to be aware that general aviation aircraft that are flying around also. There's military aircraft that are out there also. So those are just some of the things that we want to make sure people were aware of, that all the time it's just not the air carriers that's impacting the operation or the community. So the next portion is next steps. After we went back and based on some of the previous discussion, we tried to figure out what could we look at, maybe some mitigations, next step along the lines of procedure design, what that we could maybe, bring forth that you kind of facilitate that discussion. So we'll get into that, and this is where we're going to talk about the two procedures. The first is to propose the RNAP GPS to runway 6. And this is your current RNAP GPS runway 6. And if you can see, the one thing you'll notice, the altitudes, we got them, hopefully everyone can see they're in the blue, kind of light blue color. So you can see the altitudes on the current procedure. So what we tried to look at with the new one, see if there was an opportunity where we could maybe adjust some of those altitudes, maybe achieve just a little bit higher. So that's one thing we considered when we were looking at the new procedure. And one thing I will mention now, that these are just notional designs. These are just proposals. So this is nothing that's, just draft. So be aware of that. This is just some designs that we're presenting from the standpoint of ideas. And this is to propose RNAP GPS to runway 6. Now, as you can see, we created a couple additional points, 11 and waypoint 11 and waypoint 12. And I'll step away just so on those two. And you can see where the altitudes, what we tried to do on these procedures, see if there was an opportunity to raise the altitude to the extent possible to allow the aircraft to create just a normal descent into the airport. So that's what we looked at from this standpoint. So we were able to raise the altitudes a little, not a lot, because of the regular descent profile. So, and also, if you see where we did create a transition that keeps the aircraft inside the bay area also, to try to keep them away from the beach area. So that's one thing, that's kind of mirroring the back bay visual approach that's in place now. So that's one of the things we were looking at when we were designing this procedure.
May I ask a question on that slide? That 3,000 that's there sort of written over the island itself, would that mean that you would go from 4,000, by the time you hit the island, you'd be at 3,000 down to 2,400 if you were traveling in that straight line? Yep, and then see that 3,000, what does that 3,000 above it indicate?
That would be the altitude at waypoint.
When you hit the island?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be,
And to clarify, it's currently 2,000.
Yes.
And so this would be
There's a small triangle that I don't know if it's visible to everyone because it's right at the sand, basically, but that's that point that's referring to. And 3,000 feet
it feels like it's about 25 feet. I mean, you can wave to people, smile at them, check their luggage.
I don't want to get too far ahead of Chubby.
No,
I know that part of the consideration is what are the aircraft doing at that point?
Sure.
And so part of the discussion we've had internally is hoping the aircraft is in a cleaner, quieter configuration. Now, for example, if you were descending and putting out your landing gear and extending your flaps in a turn over that point, that would be a much, we refer to it as dirty, a dirtier, noisier configuration. Whereas if the aircraft may be aligned on a more optimized profile, they still have to put their landing gear out at some point. It may not be over the island, but it's some pilots may decide that it's, you all may know better than I do whether you see the landing gear come out here or not. But if you're not turning and you're in a more stable approach, that can be a quieter configuration of the aircraft, even frankly at the same altitude. So sometimes there are things you can do with altitude, sometimes there are things you can do with the aircraft, and
We recognize that pilots like to be fully organized as early as possible and appreciate that, but yeah, this is great. Thank you.
And that's, like I said, that's the proposed RNAP GPS to runway 6, and the biggest the benefit is it provides us an opportunity to bring the aircraft inside the Bay Area, and it creates the higher altitude at waypoint 11, what pretty much is the beach area. And we also, this is the same procedures, just a different profile to just kind of see more of what we call the curtain effect. So as you see what the aircraft as they're descending into the airport, the normal profile. And again, these are just notional designs. These are just kind of draft proposal, depending on the discussion. There could be changes made to these proposals if it's in requirements and the requirements of the procedures in the aircraft that can actually complete the approach. And some of the benefits, and when we were looking at, as I stated earlier, to develop the transition over the bay, avoiding the beach, which is based on some of our previous discussion. The flight path is similar to the bay visual, and the higher altitude at waypoint 11 and 12, and aircraft operating at an idle speed does hopefully, it creates where the aircraft is in a more cleaner configuration. And also with this one, as you see with the next, they are similar with the routes on it. So that's something we tried to consider when we were developing the new procedures. Some of the challenges, as I spoke to earlier, potential increase of flights over the mainland. So as you move an aircraft away from one area, you have to be aware that it may move aircraft to the inland community. So that has to be aware of, and that's a NEPA process that we have to be aware of. Environmental noise screening, as we have to go through the process when we're looking at changes to the NAS. And also there's going to be going in and speaking to those communities that's going to be impacted by the operation. Also there's ATC operational requirement. There's different separation requirements between the aircraft and the different classes, and the sequencing requirements. So that's something we also have to be aware of. Cost, benefits analysis. There's the validation in accordance with the instrument flight procedure process. And there's the implementation investments. There's time, resources. They have to be aware of also the time frame, because it does take, once the procedure is developed, it takes a while for it to actually be implemented. And also there's maintenance in the future for the procedure. The next procedure is the proposed RNAP to runway 6, and you can see it's similar to the RNAP GPS. This is the current, and as you can see where the altitudes, I'm sorry, that's the proposed, and that's just that's the actual depiction. I'm sorry, I got a slide ahead of myself. And that is the proposed just on the curtain effect. And this is the some of the benefits. Develops the transition over the bay, avoiding the beach, as with the RNAP GPS. Greater navigation, precise, precision, and accuracy. So the way I look at that, and that's what that bullet and the one a little bit longer, that's just going to what aircrafts are going to proceed on a more defined route. So that's just really kind of what that's speaking in layman terms. It reduces the step down and circling approaches, reduces mixed approaches, and the seamless vertical path. That's, like I said, those two are kind of related where it's we call it the rail effect, for lack of a better term. And the two procedures are similar. Now, some of the challenges with this particular one, which is a little bit greater than the RNAV GPS, as before, we have the potential increase of flights over the mainland community. We still have to go through the NEPA process. There's the environmental concerns and the community involvement. And the ATC requirements, there's the separation and for the training and requirements for the separation and sequencing. Also, we have to be on this one, this the fleet mix and the avionics. Because just depending on the aircraft at a particular airport, not all aircraft will be equipped to fly this one. So this one requires a little bit different equipment than RNAV GPS, so there's a equipment issue that we have to be aware of. There's a great deal more of training for the controllers and pilots involved, just because of the procedure. And also there's the cost benefits, and there's the validation according with the instrument flight procedure process, the time investment, and the maintenance for the particular procedure. Got this slide. This is really, and I remember when I was talking about the validation, and I point to this bullet. This is kind of, what I'm going to do is kind of go back and speak to that particular bullet. This is just kind of a breakdown of that process. And what it really has to do with, let's say if there is a procedure that a facility, the community, the airport was interested in maybe investing in, this would be the process that they would proceed through to get that, to start the process roll. We put the first bullet in there according to what, because we feel that it's important to reach out and establish that communication with a person. So if it was a facility or the community, that would establish that point of contact where that person, if you had any questions as you going through the process, that would be someone that you have a name that you could reach out, have those discussions. And also you would, then after that, you would submit the request through the gateway, and that information would be provided to you from that specialist. That's a website that they're actually in the process now of redoing the 43 Charlie. So there's a few changes through the process, so it's really important for you to have some point of contact as you're going through it. The IFP validation team will validate the request, analyze the request, and determine the response. And that's going to be based on the efficiency and the use in the NAS, because just because someone wants a procedure invested in it, we got to make sure it actually fits the requirement in NAS and make sure that it's going to be used and that it's going to be a benefit. So that's part of that process. If the request is not approved, it will document the reason and notify the proponent. Next step after that, if they decide to move forward with the request, they would evaluate and validate and determine the production schedule. And just the two examples, we talked about the RNAV GPS. From the time that it's approved, just a generic time frame would be roughly 18 months before it could be implemented. And for the RMP, it would be roughly 24 months from the time frame to be implemented. And questions and comments?
What does RNP mean again?
Required navigation performance. The term kind of refers to what Chubby described as the requirements for both equipment in the aircraft as well as the training that the pilot needs to have in order to be qualified to fly that. And I know we have questions and comments, but if I could just maybe help us transition to that, and then we'll go wherever you'd like us to go from there. As I said before, I think this is an ongoing conversation. We don't want to come in and say there's nothing we can do. There's a lot of technology on the horizon, and had some conversations even before the meeting that I know folks are eager to say, why can't we do that tomorrow? And there are some reasons for that, and we can maybe get into that a little bit more in the Q&A. But as Chubby described, there's a lot of, I want to say this the right way, we have an interest or we wouldn't be here. You all have been very effective and cordial and helpful in the dialogue, and so we are here and we do want to help. But this isn't the only place that people come knock on our door, and I try to say that the right way. So there is demand for procedure around the country. We also want to be realistic in terms of utilization. So we sit at a point in time in aviation that when you talk about the training that pilots have or the equipage on those aircraft, we have a procedure here that's not utilized anywhere close to 100%. In fact, it's utilized much closer to 0% than it is 100%. And so there's the future of aviation where we hope that more aircraft are on there. But the reality is, probably for everybody sitting in this room, that creates some antennas going up perhaps on a different town council or a different community group that says, whoa, you're tightening up. I know folks are familiar with the term on the rail because this group has talked about it, but if all the aircraft are flying a tighter procedure, people say, where is my house? If traffic plays in, weather plays in, the ability to sequence and tools that we're not utilizing within the FAA. I know we talked about it in the last meeting, so just the last sentence I say before we really kind of say what's the interest and where do we go from here is in general, all the traffic in Florida is increasing. And part of the reason that traffic has to go off the coast, and I know it makes people scratch their heads or perhaps pound their countertop or their patio, but we have to sequence those aircraft. So if there's a plane coming down from the northwest and a plane coming abeam the airport that heads out over the coast and turns in, somebody has to give. It's like a stoplight, essentially. The controllers have to sequence that with the spacing, and Chubby said that. So I know people wonder, why do they have to go out further? And sometimes it's the controller's sometimes the controller has that ability to make the situation better, and sometimes there's just enough traffic that they don't. Sometimes a controller will take an option, a pilot will take an option for a route, and sometimes they won't. But we're trying to have a discussion so that we start at least on the same page, and hopefully Chubby's at least, I think he's done a great job. Thank you, Chubby, for walking through some of the options and technologies that we can design procedures to. We can have foundations in place some number of months down the road, and then work toward increasing the utilization of those. But again, we can't design those procedures overnight, and we can't force the utilization of those even after they're published immediately. But industry will begin to see the benefits of the optimized descents, the idle fuel burn. I know I said I was going to say last sentence, but there can be benefits to industry of flying even a longer route, or if it's optimized and the aircraft is idling. So those are conversations that we want to have as well. So we're listening, and maybe I'll just be quiet at that.
It's just open for question. Like I said, thank you for your time. Hopefully this was a benefit in that discussion. So just
Thank you. Thank you so much. Amy, I'm not going to do much today. There was a couple slides I want to show you, and they do relate directly to your comments with regard to looking at September. And we're about to enter season, and I just wanted to give you a couple slides that tells you what season is like here. I can't progress these. I think that when the Back Bay approach was changed, it did reduce the overflights over our island, to 46.8% from 73.9%, and this is 63,000 arrivals, that we started out with, and then the more recent arrivals. Thank you, Tom Babcock, Citizen of the Year. But what we did find, however, is that they're still coming in lower. As a matter of fact, we got more lower over the beach. And that aircraft under 2,000 feet, not just 3,000 feet, but 2,000 feet, increased to 14% of those arrivals. So, and then we had no improvement in the nighttime performance. And I have to say, next slide, please, that the seasonal effect, of course, is our peak tourist season, of course, is February, March, and April. And we get as many as 200 aircraft arrivals per day at RSW, and as compared to maybe 50 to 60 off-season. So we have a tremendously higher percent of flights coming over. I don't want to spend a long time. I'm going to go through these quickly next. So what we basically get is 101 aircraft flying over Fort Myers Beach, and 37 may be below 3,000 feet. 12 may be below 2,000 feet, as low as 1,400 feet. And on the average, 8 aircraft fly over during the nighttime hours from what we call 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. So they do travel farther and spend more time in the airspace when they travel downwind to 6 compared to 24 as well. And that has impacts. Next, please.
So 25 was a slight exaggeration on my part, Mr. Mayor. Slight exaggeration.
And so we just get back to, once again, the improvements that I'm just going to leave this up while I just make a couple of comments. Now, on your presentation, Chubby, on behalf of Mr. O'Hara and the FAA, first of all, I want to commend you. I truly, heartfelt appreciation, because I see that you listened. And I'm sure that the members of the audience, they've worked at this longer than I have. But I know that they see that you have listened and you are responding, and that is greatly appreciated.
It is.
So that's number one. We would love to have magical answers, but we do recognize that good news is what really transpires, and that we work through the good news and eventually come maybe to a magical answer. That just took longer. We're all on town council, and we started out as just plain old citizens who love our town, and we found that everything we thought we'd do in the first month on town council, we still haven't accomplished in the third year of our term sometimes. So we recognize, and we're a lot lower down the chain of what transpires in government than you are. So we recognize and appreciate that. I applaud what you're calling your informal runway use program for Miami. I did notice that you're saying that it's 12 midnight to 6. We always thought it was 10 till 6. So I'm wondering about the discrepancy there, but it looks like good improvement in terms of that communication, and that's appreciated, because being awoken at night with flights, and they do come in at 1,400, 1,500 feet, it'll give you a nightmare and keep you awake. Number two, with regard to the RNAV GPS, RSW runway 6, we appreciate, the cleaner, quieter configuration, because we do recognize the difference of the noise at one airplane at a certain level coming in, and the difference of what the next one seems to sound like as it comes over us at the same elevation. So of the most exciting of the things I see is that you really are looking at this notional design of raising to the 3,000, coming at 4,000, 3,000, 2,400, and even bringing that RNAV, the back bay, around at the 3,000. I think that is a huge improvement. And while we're looking for a reduction overall in the number of aircraft over Fort Myers Beach, the ones that do come over when they're at 3,000 feet or higher are, as you know, far different than the ones coming in at 2,000 or 1,400. And we get so many over our homes in season. We have 60,000 people on the island, and we live outdoors. We're not an indoor community. So when we're out on the beach, out on our porches, out in the open cafes, and they come in at 1,400, 2,000 feet, it's a big difference than 3,000. So that one proposal there, that notional design and getting that enacted is huge to us. We do recognize we're very, you're calling a needful process. And Fort Myers Beach doesn't wish other communities to be subjected to the problems that we're having. We never have. Unfortunately, no one, it's just a matter of fact, and I don't think any of you folks were even in your roles at the time. Back in 1998, when the air traffic design changed, the patterns changed, in all honesty, nobody spoke to us about making a railroad track over us. And we do have a railroad track. We're not looking to hurt other communities, but I think the FAA and other people do call it an equitable shared burden. And if that means that we get less and somebody else gets a little bit more, that still is equitable. So we recognize that you're going to have to be talking to other communities, but we also recognize that it's really not fair for it to just stay 100% over us, because we never asked for it either. And frankly, we've had 13 town council resolutions from that early time asking, please, for a resolution for the problem. And, you know, we've politely and quietly done that, but, you know, we're willing to share our burden with the other communities, and we're thankful. With regard to environmental concerns, I always find it interesting. We are a very environmental island. I live on the beachfront, and I'm a real advocate for the island, but I always find it interesting when we talk about the environmental impacts, particularly of the, let's say, the Back Bay route. And I do care about the birds, but I don't think the birds are any more bothered by the noise than I am, or the people around me. I don't think the birds are any more impacted. They can fly away. The people in our homes that have these flights coming over and are collecting jet fuel on their patio tables, I think they have a right to be heard just as well as the birds, frankly, that can pick another tree more quickly than we can pick another patio. So the balance for that, I understand the FAA, and I am an advocate for the environment, but I'm an advocate for human being health. And so I'll just make that statement. We also agree with the IFP and your procedure processes, always putting safety first. We do know that, you know, experiments by airlines have been done, especially on that Back Bay, showing that, you know, fuel and time savings are made for most of the airlines. I understand there's other indications, like you say, being able to glide in, you know, things like that, that might not being a pilot, might not being ATC, I don't fully understand. But we would never request anything that hurts anyone's safety. I've been flying a lot this month. I flew through Charlotte, and for the first time, I flew in at 10:30 on a connection through Charlotte. We got held for a while in the pattern. It's the first time that I could really see that I've seen that loop around and been in line and watched them, plane after plane after plane, taking that loop around to the approach, and it was so visual to me. We do want to improve the use of, increase the use of 24, and we do want to increase that release time to 24, or the release time to 6, where it is released earlier, to mirror what they're doing on 24 right now. Just a high percentage, and I think I had that slide. Do I have one more slide up? I might not have, no. You can put that slide back up, because that's really what we're talking about. But we all know the slide that you put up about the percentage of flights that come in on 24 and where they're released over Fort Myers. And, you know, let's see. I'm going to just look at my chart real quickly, because I have it here, and I want to get the numbers correct. So on runway 6, only 1%, 1% come in close to Fort Myers and turn when they go into runway 6, but 77% are released early coming over Fort Myers and coming onto 24 arrival, whereas 49% are brought over our island and only 3% going into 24. So those downwind approaches to runway 6 and runway 24, once again, we're still looking to have those changed so that the release point, the arrivals downwind to 24, are really allowed to initiate their turn earlier, or the runway 6 can initiate earlier, just as they do to 24. And that really was the routine pattern prior to 1998. And I realize there's a huge change in the number of flights arriving, and that's why those patterns were changed, but it still seems to be an inequitable pattern over our island. At this time, I don't have any specific questions for you other than what I've already stated. I so appreciate your presentation, and I so appreciate, I think everyone does, showing that you are listening and you're making some attempts. I would like to open up. Is there a question or two? I don't want to belabor it. Are there some big questions that somebody wants to from our air group? Anyone? Tom?
Is there a PowerPoint in there called discussion by any chance, hopefully?
Yes, there is.
Let me just start off by saying on behalf of...
I'm not sure that Amy heard you.
Okay.
Amy, you have a second PowerPoint called discussion.
Thank you. On behalf of Islanders, which is an affectionate name we provide for residents, businesses, and the many, many guests we get, particularly during season, we truly appreciate your willingness to work with Town Council to discuss some of these issues. I want to start by, I really appreciate the kind of the process you described for change. What isn't obvious to me, and maybe you can answer, is how do you initiate a request? Knowing that RSW needs to deal not just with Fort Myers Beach, but all the communities around the airport. Is it RSW you look to initiate some of these changes?
So ideally, the airport could have input from communities and industry and bring that to the FAA, and we would have a particular design or procedure that there was general advocacy for. But ideally, we would work with the airport and they would pick up something and run with it. I'm not saying they have to specifically bring it to us, but we would want them to at least endorse that and have the recognition of what would work with the industry. I don't want to speak specific to Fort Myers with this example, but they might say something just wouldn't work with their operation. And so that's the best case, is that we have a combined agreement that we want to pursue a particular option.
I'm assuming the strongest way to initiate something is if you work through RSW, because they need to be concerned with all of the people that are impacted, as you said it. And we've been trying to look for win-win solutions, where I think Joanne mentioned, we don't want to punish somebody else, although we feel like we may have been punished at the expense of other communities in the past. In working out of the situation that we're in now, we certainly would like to work and partner with other communities as well. So I'll say that right up front. I don't know if you handed out a copy of the request list that was your last slide.
I did not. They've had it from last time. So
Okay, I'd like to at least work from that, and maybe we can refer to it, and really appreciate your presentation from today, because I think it hits on some things that we really are interested in, and probably the biggest impact for us clearly is to move the aircraft closer to the runway. I mean, Fort Myers Beach is over 10 miles away. And if you look at what happens on arrivals to 24, the turns clearly are much closer. And the reason I put some of these slides together, this is a slide that was taken from the last Part 150 study. And it's interesting in there, when this was really the first time that the shifty approach had appeared on the Part 150 study, which was the route that was added south of the runway. And this report essentially says that, looking at least at downwind arrivals, the distance from the runway should be exactly the same whether you're landing on 24 or 6. Could I have the next slide? This is a chart that I think you put up at the last meeting. It's a great illustration, by the way, of a 1 week's arrival on Fort Myers Beach, or on, at RSW. It turns out during this time frame, because of wind conditions, a lot of aircraft were actually landing on 24 rather than 6. But this is particularly good because you can now compare how are they arriving to 6 versus 24. And just looking at that, it certainly looks that on average, the aircraft flying the downwind approach in either direction is turning much closer when they land on 24 rather than on 6, despite the fact that the paperwork would indicate they should be essentially the same distance from the airport. If you give me the next slide, please. This is essentially data we've created for pretty much that same week. There's an overlap of about 5 days. And we've tried to put those into buckets. And it's fairly easy for the Bay visual, where they initiate their turn essentially when they fly over Route 41. And so we can compare with these buckets, essentially, how many of the aircraft we would expect to be coming out over Fort Myers Beach, because they've gone beyond that turn over 41, and compare them at the same distances on the other side of the runway for 24. And the closest point that's indicated on that slide for aircraft landing on 24, essentially they're initiating their turn at or before they fly over Route 82. This is how we do it. It's not an exact science by any means, but if you compare the number that turn early during that same week that was shown on the previous slide, over 80% are making a turn at or before Route 82, whereas less than 9% would be at an equivalent distance, which, by the way, would be initiating a turn over I-75. We're proposing that if we could look on arrivals to 06 as we do on 24, there would probably be less when you add the direct arrivals as well. There would be less than 5% of the aircraft that fly over Fort Myers Beach. That's the vision that we have. And we see that as a win-win, because despite the fact you've commented that turning earlier is going to put more aircraft over mainland, that probably is true, because they may not drift all the way out over the Back Bay. However, the area that they would fly over is mostly commercial. It's essentially following the I-41 corridor to make its turn to align with the airport. So, trust me, people in Estero and Bonita Springs would love to see a change like this. Besides the fact it would probably be a significant cost savings to the airlines. I would hope it's less stressful for the ATC people, but I can't speak for them. They're going to spend less time in your airspace. I think Southwest looked at just the impacts of the Bay visual, or the Back Bay visual, and they were looking at millions of dollars in a year. If that can be expanded to every airline, you're looking at a significant savings. And I'm not an expert on the economics, but I would think this even allows RSW to increase its capacity. If you can get them out of your airspace and on the ground faster, you can accommodate more airplanes. So we just see this as an opportunity, as a win-win-win. I understand the process. I understand the significant process you need to go through to make a change as significant as this take place. Could I have the next slide, please? Ah, this. Good. Let me back up one. I thought we had another one in there, but okay, I want to jump to this. One of the issues is confined workspace or airspace, and this is another slide from the 30th presentation that shows all the other airports around RSW. I guess the basic reason I put this up here and ask the question, is there any reason for us to believe, if in fact that turn to 06 could be made earlier, preferably over 75, is there any reason to think that there would be an issue to other airports in the area? Don't all speak at once. I mean, it's...
The main concern is to make sure that no two aircraft occupy the same space at the same time.
That would be a good idea.
That's the guiding principle.
I absolutely would support that. The fact that it can be done for aircraft landing on 24, I assume it could be done for 6 as well. Okay. If we can get fewer aircraft over us, obviously the other two improvement opportunities become less of an issue. But since that's not going to happen maybe in the next couple of years even, I want to back up. This, we want to talk about nighttime. And this was another chart on the right that was given at the last presentation by FAA. And I put this up because we happen to have data over approximately the same time limit, although it includes Christmas, a lot more aircraft than looking at one day. The point is, you can't look at one day's data and learn much of anything. Do I like looking at 62,000 aircraft arrivals? Statistically, you have to have a large number to really know what's going on. There is definitely a seasonal variability, as Joanne mentioned. There's a daily variability. We're a destination, thank goodness. We see a lot of aircraft coming in right at lunchtime and dinner time and even late at night. And they can be particularly disruptive. So the statistics you see are for a large number over a large period of time. But one aircraft at 1,400 feet at 1 o'clock in the morning is a lot more disruptive, and I guarantee you the people in this room would say they think every airplane is coming over their house. So it's important to understand that this is really important data, and I put it up here primarily because I really appreciate your discussion on the difference that exists between what happens when RSW is controlling at night compared to Miami. And it's not just the fact that despite 24 being preferred, actually there's much better performance for RSW actually putting them on 24 than 6. But more than that, far more than that, is the percentage of aircraft that come over the island at night is almost twice as frequent for when Miami's in control than RSW, which is why we, besides the things that we've asked for improved training and whatnot, I guess one thing we'd like to throw out there is why don't we extend the hours for RSW ATC, I'm sure you'll love that, to 1 a.m. and to start an hour early at 5 a.m. And I put those numbers based on data. We know that more aircraft are actually being scheduled to arrive after midnight, usually before 1 o'clock unless there's a delay for weather, which you can't control. And there's an increasing number of aircraft coming in before 6 and 7 o'clock. And we're seeing an increased number of box carriers. There's a FedEx that comes in between 5 and 6. There's 2 UPS that come in usually before 7, oftentimes before 6. During season, we're seeing an increased number of aircraft coming from the west. There were some coming from the Colorado area. I'm not sure if there aren't some coming beyond. These are terribly disruptive. They almost always come over the island, oftentimes between 5 and 6 in the morning. I am really pleased with how the controllers here at RSW have been maintaining what they said they would do. And I understand the educational issues of Miami, and I don't know if there's an economic decision here or whatnot, but who decides when RSW will control our airspace compared to when Miami? Is this an economic decision? Somebody help me with that, please.
The only that I can answer is just based on the amount of traffic. And like I said, I don't know all the history between how we came to those hours, but mainly normally it's the amount of aircraft that are flying into a particular airport. That's going to determine the hours, because there's orders that are in place that determines if you can have a 24-hour facilities. And you have to take those procedures and all those different requirements into place when you're actually trying to extend the hours. So, like I said, I don't know how we came about the present hour, but I know the order speaks to there's a certain amount of operations and certain requirements for you to be a 24-hour facility.
So you actually have to have more aircraft here to have a penalty.
I don't want to say, I mean, because I guess we would have to look at when the decision was made originally to operate between the hours. So those requirements the number of operations may have changed. I don't know if that's been evaluated to look at extending the hours. I don't know if there's a request to, I know you made mention of that request, but I don't know if that's actually been, kind of evaluated to extend the hours, to be honest with you.
Thank you. Maybe, we can add that on our looking at list for you. Thank you.
we've never, in any of our efforts, tried to discourage people from coming to our airport by any means. So if it is expanding beyond midnight, if it's expanding early in the morning, that's a good thing. And I'm not sure what the economics, who actually pays the FAA controllers. I would hope that RSW would give this some thought, because that, I assume, is a request that could be made by them. Okay.
Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, let me move on. I think maybe the rest, you've pretty well talked about. There was a significant improvement for us in October of 2017. Never had anybody actually tell me what happened on that day. None of these approaches that you're looking at were done at that time. There was a bay visual approach, but on I could almost say March 15th of 2017, it went from 90% of the aircraft on Shifty coming over the island to less than 50%. Is it because it's been made public? What happened? Can anybody help me?
There was procedures that changed. Baby visual approach was one of them, and also the standard procedures that we have in RSW was changed a little bit for that. So that was one of those things.
If you can keep moving that way, in the interim, till all these wonderful things get implemented, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Did anyone else have maybe a single question that has not been covered? Sir.
The spaghetti chart
Up
that
here.
you, the spaghetti
Can I
chart that you
identify
show
you?
the incoming flights, Dave Trelease, Fort Myers Beach, Ocean Harbor. We are the 16-story towers that you fly over.
Is it Mr. Gartmush, is it? Could you please
Trelease,
state your name?
Trelease,
State your name.
Dave Trelease.
Thank you. Dave Trelease.
So the spaghetti chart that you showed with the incoming flights, if you could do a spaghetti chart that shows the height, that would be very helpful. Because at night, our towers get buzzed quite a bit. And like the mayor said, you can actually see the people in the plane. You know, they're showing off the island, the lights are going. When we had the offshore boat races, there were more planes coming in lower than we had in a long time because they were showing off.
I had a quick question. What's the volume difference between runway 6 and 24?
What's the volume difference?
Right. Are they 50-50? Is it 60-40,
No, it's
20-80?
50, don't forget, you have a downwind approach and the way the wind runs.
Joanne, will you grab that
Oh,
microphone
yes,
now
sir.
for there, just so you're.
We're just going to have more on 6 than 24 because, they're downwind approaches and our island sits in that direction, so.
Well, I wasn't complaining about it. I just want to know what
Tom,
it is.
do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, about 65%.
Our runway 6?
Yeah.
Yes, and that changes seasonally.
So not to throw any water or anything, but I guess so that's almost twice as much on runway 6 as 24. So they have a much tighter concentration. I'm thinking about why they cut in so early on 24 versus 6. I mean, that's something that I would assume you have to deal with.
Air traffic controller probably can answer this better than I can. You still have the conflicts to deal with if they're all landing on 24 or if they're all landing on 6.
You really need to be on the microphone, so.
What Tom's saying is you still have conflicts, of volume on 24 or 6, and it is a judgment by air traffic control because safety is the primary issue, and we recognize that. So.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I think we're to the let's formalize what we're doing moving forward. Of course, you gave a timeline of about 18 to 24 months, and we'd like to change that to 18 to 24 days. So let's do that first.
Michael, that is not a joke.
I said something about realistic expectations. And I'm not trying to
She also said
interrupt.
something about magic.
It's we are really happy with our efforts to try to address the concerns that are here, but it doesn't help any of us to set unrealistic expectations.
No, of course not.
We recognize that, and we're very happy too. I don't want that to get lost. We're very pleased with what's transpired between our last meeting and this, tremendously so. Thank you. So, where do we go from here? What timeline do you set? You know what our 3 things are: reduce the number, keep them high, and get Miami or RSW, whomever, to get those night times under 24 as much as possible. Those are our main things, and you're making great progress on all of those. Are you thinking that increasing the elevation to 3,000 is going to be at least 18 to 24 months, or is there an opportunity where is there any mechanism by which those flights get elevated quicker?
To double back on that, Mr. O'Hara, you mentioned 4 months. In 4 months, you would be able to see what the effects were of the training in the Miami Center. So I'm just wondering, there is an election in March, and for sure, Joanne and I aren't going to be here. Bruce may or may not be here, and I'm just wondering if that would put us to February. If perhaps February would be a good opportunity for another discussion, or would that be too soon? That would give you your 4 months.
I think that's a possibility. I wasn't aware of all the turnover on the council. And,
It's sad, but it's a reality.
So you gonna swap places, or?
No. We're retiring.
But we have interesting people coming in.
That's right. So, who will still have this concern?
Yes.
So I think if the town council was interested, and I don't know if are we leaving the slides? I mean, I'm certainly happy to make available.
Yes, no,
So
I don't want to take any,
if-
I think
if you have
we've
those
talked about what we
slides,
want and need, and you.
And I don't know if Jeff has an opinion on this or not, so maybe I should ask the question, but if you all have a strong advocacy for some of the material we presented and you're comfortable having a discussion with the airport, we're willing to be a part of that. I don't want to leave it with Jeff. I just want to make sure he or the airport is looped in any of those discussions. I can commit, I think I can commit to us coming back in February. Chubby's nodding, Jose's nodding, so I think you encouraged us last time to come back in February anyway.
That would be
That way you
great.
get some traffic.
Of course, I was saying to Kathleen on the ride over that I think we were on 3 different flights at least, so I felt like we were contributing.
Contributing to the problem.
I have the flight-aware tracks of where everybody flew, and I know that actually at least you both came in on 2-4. So kudos to Kathleen and Chubby. They came in on 2-4. I think we all came in on 2-4. In any event, I think the challenge is, an immediate adoption. So I think where we go is, if you say we love some of the slide material, I think we have conversations with that. It begins to be an industry discussion, because really, it takes a certain amount of time to get those procedures in place, and we can't significantly accelerate that. But really where we want to be is in the utilization and adoption of those. We want to have something that industry's embracing.
Right.
We could spend 18 months designing a procedure that nobody uses, and that's not going to help us. So I think having the industry engagement, making sure we've covered the bases, and we have something that's flyable.
Well, I agree with you. The industry engagement is critical, because we know that the pilots have some freedom in how they fly, and we support that. And so if you don't engage them, I don't think we're going to get the result that we want anyway. I think it's important that that's a comprehensive approach. I think that, we support everything that you've proposed here. We're pleased with what you've proposed. Is there any concern? Would anybody raise their hand and say, other than they want it tomorrow, that the direction isn't the great direction and everything looks good? Yes, Annie?
Sorry.
The microphone doesn't work.
Annie Babcock. I just would like to, thank you. I'd like to ask a specific question, 2 questions. One is, I don't think I heard the answer. Coming in earlier to make 6 look exactly like 24, is that a possibility?
So what I've written down is that we need to look at that. We have an ability to look at our tracks. Somebody mentioned altitudes, and I think, I don't want to say that I get confused, although I guess I will say there's a lot of airports and a lot of tracks. So we have the ability to color by altitude. I think you've seen it on some of our charts. We also have the ability to shade certain areas as Tom presented in the material. You know, where are we making the turns? And we could have a discussion with air traffic about why. Sometimes there are reasons.
The reason
but
I ask you is because back in May, I heard the tape and someone had said that it was not possible. And so I was just following up to make sure that it's still an open discussion on bringing in airplanes as close to 6 as 24.
So I have written that down. I will share, and I don't know if, Joe, if the facility has any immediate feedback, or maybe you offered it in May. The 81% surprises me. I say that not being a controller, that's not my background. But 81% turning to 2.4 that close. I'm not questioning the data, but I don't know that we would expect to see numbers that high. But Joe, I don't know if you've shared on that in the past, or if you have any immediate thoughts.
In the past, I mean, there's different approaches to runway 6, and there's 2.4, the big one being ILS. So an ILS approach, you have to start that approach farther out than you would any other approach. So that's the big issue, or the big difference between runway 6 and runway 24. 6 has an ILS, runway 24 doesn't.
Instrument landing
I
system.
know.
It's a
And
precision approach that allows them to land in
I understand. And the second question is, what is the cutoff speed for landing when the wind is, either have an option of landing on 24 or landing on 6 in the evening? We have seen where the weather is 100% visibility with 0 winds or 5 knots. What is the cutoff to land on 24 that the controllers are giving the pilot compared to 6?
You talking about wind speed or?
Wind speed, yes, sorry.
It's
The tailwind.
Yeah, it's company, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, they're always going to prefer the favorable winds.
But I
10
mean,
knots is an absolute no-no. Aircraft will not even consider it. But I would say if it favors 6 by 5 knots, then airline's going to prefer runway 6. That's just the safest.
so in other words, if the wind is coming in, if it's 5 miles or 5 knots, that should be a determination at nighttime that they should be landing on 24?
one determination.
If it favors runway
If it
24, that
favors.
would be a considerable factor. But there's also thunderstorms, there's weather.
And if the weather is clear, then
And just remember, I'm sure you
eliminating
are, but
wonderful
the weather here isn't always the same
Okay.
as the airport or
That's for
what's
sure.
northeast of the airport.
That's
So there
for
could be
sure.
weather northeast of the airport, and then we're gonna favor runway 6 because of that weather, so there's different.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Annie. Okay, I think we got all our questions done. Thank you. So, it sounds like, in general, everybody's very pleased with your, response, your activities since our last meeting. And we're looking forward to getting together in February and moving forward with the same, find out what progress is being made, what improvements have been made, and what still needs to be done, and we're working in the right direction. It's greatly appreciated.
And all of your new data.
Yes.
Her new data.
And the new
Mr.
data.
Mulder, you kind of leaned in. Did you have
Sure.
something to add?
Yeah, and what, certainly what they presented today, some of the notional ideas, especially the ideas of raising the altitude, I think that's certainly worthy of looking at. And if we have a role to play, as whether it be a formal request or whatever, I certainly would be glad to work with the FAA and the tower and the region on that, just to see what we can do. So I'll continue that dialogue between now and February, and just keep talking and
Thank
looking
you.
at some of those ideas. Sure.
Thank you
very
so much. Mr. Boulder has been superb to
Tremendous.
work with, and we really appreciate it.
Sure.
You arrived with a positive attitude, taking over in your position, and we appreciate it.
We hope you're around a long time.
Yeah, we do.
Look at, what is that forlorn face you just had? Did you see that, Ray? Oh, gosh, I hope you won.
So, you want to send us some dates in February, and we'll go from there. Our normal council meetings are the first and third Mondays.
But we will make a place for you.
We will
Yeah.
make a place for you anytime.
I have one more question.
Yes, sir.
Bruce? ILS, that's only on one of the runways?
Correct.
That's 6?
It's only on six, when you go 6.
And why is it not available on 24? What's that take to do that? Chump change.
Is it really? Is it money?
It used to be money, but it's almost more of a policy issue now. We just don't deploy that many new instrument landing systems because it's kind of like deploying, I should have something that rolls off my tongue, but an 8-track tape might be a poor analogy, but yeah, putting out a new CD or cassette tape. We stopped really a decade or more ago because of the capability that Chubby mentioned. We're implementing more of the satellite-based procedures, the RMP, the RNAV procedures. They give us all of the safety and probably even more of the benefits.
Do you, on that topic then,
That's
do you
interesting.
suspect that at any point the ILS on 6 will be phased out? No? If it's there, it stays? How do you break it? How can we go, never mind.
How do you break it? Joanne.
That's a federal piece of property.
I won't go there, I'm just teasing.
Based on 36-year evaluation, yes, eventually it's going to be phased out because there are new technologies coming. When I first got in the agency, there was no such thing as GPS or RNAV. It's all new technology. So eventually the ILS will be phased out. Now it's not going to be next week, but eventually, I mean, all the technology is changing.
Yeah.
So yeah, based on technology, it'll be phased out.
I just got a new car and it's taken me like 3 weeks to get used to all of it myself, so that's just my car. Well, great.
Tom, if you're going to
Tom,
comment,
if
you
you're
have
gonna
to
speak,
speak into
come
a
here.
microphone.
I don't have good statistics on this, but just looking at weather conditions, about 95% of the time, they wouldn't need ILS. That doesn't mean they aren't using it, but, I mean, weather-wise, you don't.
A lot of times it's a backup. You may know how to drive across the country, but you're gonna put in the directions. So a lot of times it's a guidance, especially at night for an airline flying on a profile. So
Especially
that's-
over the wire.
Yeah, over the web. So, you'll call us, right?
We'll try to
Or
get
wait, she's looking, she's already saying the third Monday, maybe?
The first Monday's the day after the Super Bowl, so that's probably not gonna be good for us, we'll be real busy.
Won't be good for most people.
But we'll hope for maybe the third Monday in February, and we'll confirm that. And again, on behalf of the town council and all the citizenry here, we appreciate it. We appreciate the safety and the wonderfulness, shall we say, of RSW. We all use it. We love our airport, and we really appreciate the FAA working with the airport and us to just make it the best functioning airport it can possibly be, with the most responsiveness to the community needs around it. And we thank you very much for your time.
Mr.
everyone.
O'Hara, February is an exciting time here, so, because there's lots of people, lots of buzz on the island, so let us know when you have your plans made, and we'll make sure that you could have maybe a nice stay over or something.
Very good.
Okay? Thank you all so much,
Thank you all.
all
Thank
of you, for your contributions to this issue that we've been working on for many, many years. Commissioner Sandelli, thank you for being here. Thank you all, the Air Group and audience members. It's 2:53 and we stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.